So let's okay.
Hi, Steve.
Hey, how are you?
Good. You're recording?
Yeah, I mean, it's just thank you all for coming today. Honestly, it's been amazing to see the people that have come out and to be able to listen to about talks about infertility and mental health. And I just really appreciate all of you. I know some of you have probably gone to all three, some of you have gone to a couple, and maybe this is your first one, but I just wanted to acknowledge and say I really appreciate everyone just being able to come in and listen to something that's not typically talked about, especially within like social work or psychology or any of the mental health professions. It's not really talked about. And that's why I'm trying to kind of change that. So, yeah. So just kind of some things before we get really fully started. Just wanted to acknowledge, like we have in the last couple of ones, of that the University of Wisconsin-Madison is on Ho-Chunk land, and it's something that we just wanted to acknowledge, that all the First Nations in part of Wisconsin, and even in the United States and Canada, and many of the First Nations and Indigenous people, learning about what land you're on. And there's so much history and so much culture that has been missed and lost us due to the colonization and all that. So I just strongly urge to, wherever you are, learning about the First Nations that are in the land that you are living on, and learning about that. And also want to acknowledge Black History Month and making sure that everyone's educating themselves on that important topic as well. So, like I've said before, one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to do this whole series as a project of mine is because my wife and I struggle with infertility. We did IVF. We were fortunate enough to be successful. And looking back at it, we kind of saw that there's some things that are missing regarding mental health. And I kind of want to change that. I mean, I want to be able to kind of reduce stigma. One of the great social workers that we all know, Brene Brown, has said, the only way to reduce stigma is by normalizing it, right? And we normalize it by having a conversation and opening that up to letting everybody understand that experience. So that's one of the big reasons why, I wanted to kind of help reduce stigma, and also just create awareness amongst the professionals as well as about the issues that kind of happen. So, before I forget though, if you are here for CEUs, you're good. We'll have everything in chat. If you could though, before you leave today, if you're going on phone or have a first name, just put your full name in the chat before you leave today, and then we can actually go back and then see who attended. So that's the best way that's been happening. So without further ado, I would love to introduce you to Jeanne Ferguson and Chris Roeder from Wisconsin Fertility Institute with the School of Social Work here at UW-Madison. And this is going to be different because I'm going to let them introduce themselves and see and let them tell you kind of what their background and history with all this is. So I don't know if Jeanne or Chris want to go first. It's up to you.
Go ahead, Jeanne.
Okay, I think what we'd like to do is to go ahead and start our slideshow, and then we're going to introduce ourselves in there as the beginning to show up.
Do you want me to do the pre-webinar questions first and then do that, or?
Sure, why don't you do that?
Okay.
Yeah.
So I know all of you, when you guys registered, you took a short little quiz, a 4-question quiz, and I am going to share my screen. And we will actually go through that, which actually, So the first question that was on there was, gestational carriers do not form any emotional attachment to the baby they carry, true or false? So what would you say? Chris, what would you say?
That's a big false.
Yeah.
I mean, that's false with a bunch of exclamation points after it. There's a huge emotional attachment.
All right, so next one is, which of the following cannot be purchased directly from a cryopreservation tissue bank? It was sperm, eggs, or embryos.
Embryos.
Yeah. And then question 3, it says egg and sperm donors are anonymous to the parents using their biological products, so there's no need for legal agreements between the intended parents and the donors. True or false?
That is false.
Yep. And the last one is gestational carriers carry and deliver a child for another couple or person, intended parents, do not use their own eggs to make the embryos and do not come from the carrier and require a psychological evaluation or all the above.
That would be D, all of the above.
Yeah, correct. So, all right. So I will stop sharing my screen and then you guys can share yours and do your introductions.
All right, great. We are going to share here. Let me see if I can do this right. Okay, I'm looking at two screens here. Can you see? Are we set, Steve?
Yep, I just see one screen. So,
okay, great. Well, welcome everyone. We very much appreciate you coming to have a conversation with us about third-party reproduction, surrogacy, and mental health. And what I'll say in the beginning, two things right off the bat. One of the things that I couldn't help but notice, and I'm always noticing this, is that 95% of the people that are in attendance here are women. And this is a really sort of prominent, dominant kind of reality in the world of fertility and surrogacy, and sometimes in the world of mental health as well, because women carry so many burdens sociologically in our society, and reproduction is one of them. Even though, Steve, the reason that you organize these workshops is so that men could have some attention be given to the issues that men face in their reproduction as well. So we're going to talk together, Chris and I, and we're going to run through a slideshow with you. If you have questions, you can post them in the chat. And if we're talking about something and you have a question right about that thing, Steve's going to watch the chat and make sure that we can answer your question in the moment. And then we'll save about 15, 20 minutes at the end for a variety of questions having to do with anything you want to talk about third-party reproduction. If that works for you, that's how we have planned it. So let me see. So Chris, can you start us off by describing what third-party reproduction is?
Sure, absolutely. So anytime a person or a couple need assistance to become pregnant with using somebody other than a non-intimate person. Makes sense? Did I say that correctly? So for example, we have a heterosexual couple, male, female, but they're going to use an egg donor. So that would be third party. They have another person that's going to assist them with the pregnancy.
Right. And the same is true for gay men who obviously don't possess a uterus. And so they need somebody to carry their child, and they need an egg donor as well. So right. There are lots of permutations of those combinations of needs that people have. And as we talk about all the details of these processes, we're going to interweave the reality of emotional and psychological impact throughout this whole process, because it really starts even before someone contacts your agency, Chris, your clinic. People have already had some life events that have caused them to come to you.
That's correct.
This is something that is present for every single patient that you see. Is that right?
Yes, yes, definitely.
Yeah. So we're going to do a little introduction here. Let me see if I can make sure that the slideshow progresses. Sorry.
And Jeannie, just wanted to mention that it's not in presentation view. We're seeing like the slides on the side and all of that.
Oh, okay. Let me see if I can change that. Steve, I wonder if this, we rehearsed it and it worked, but now it's not showing that way. Let me try it this way. No?
Let's show me.
So it looks like it should be in slideshow. Sorry for this. We thought we had it right. I thought I had it right.
If you try going to the bottom, Jeannie, the bottom right, and choosing go over one more. Yep, go down. Yep, try to clicking on that.
There. That's weird.
Okay.
Should I stop sharing and see what happens and then try it again? Or
Sure, yeah. If you stop sharing and try to bring it up in slideshow mode.
okay. Sorry, thought I had it. How about this one?
We just need you to share your screen.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Sorry. Where is the? So now I'm really stuck because I don't see the, wait, okay, I got it. Sorry. Try it again. Sorry. Now we can see the screen. And we still have,
Yeah, it looks like it's still in not slideshow format. So that's okay if you can't get it to switch to that.
no, I'd rather have it the way we rehearsed it, that's for sure.
I'm gonna open up the slides that you sent me, and then I'm gonna see
Yes.
if maybe it will work for.
That would be great if you could try that. Sorry.
It's okay. We'll fix it in post.
Okay, great.
That
Thank
was a joke.
you. We get it.
There we go.
So then Steve, can you advance?
Yes. Just let me know where you want me to stop.
Okay, good. I'm going to do it this way. All right, so if you could go to the second slide, that would be great. And so where we're coming from, Chris and I currently teach at the University of Wisconsin, which is how I know Steve and Angela, in the area of child abuse and neglect. That's been my area of practice in social work for almost 50 years, not quite 50 years. But I also now I'm retired from that work and I have a few part-time jobs. One of them is working at the Surrogacy Center, which is an agency that was started about 20 years ago now by a couple of attorneys here in Wisconsin who saw the need for people to have an opportunity to expand their family, create their families through the use of surrogacy, but to have really good, solid legal protections in place. In the old days with traditional surrogacy, there were some nightmare scenarios that occurred where the babies born were fought over in court. And so in today's current world, that almost never happens if you use reputable attorneys and clinics and agencies that know all the legal logistics that have to be in place to preserve the child's right to their biological or their legal families. And part of that is that gestational carriers who carry these babies don't get into it because they want to take a baby home. They want you to take your baby home. They already have their children. So this is the work that we do. We coordinate with intended parents who are hoping to be able to expand their families or create a family. And then women who sign up to be surrogates because they love their own children. They value the gift of family and they want to be able to contribute to somebody's ability to have that. So that's what I do. And Chris, can you talk about, Steve, if you go to the next slide, Wisconsin Fertility Institute.
Absolutely. So for those of you that don't know, Wisconsin Fertility was founded in 2007 by husband and wife team, Dr. David Olive and Dr. Elizabeth Pritz. They previously had been with University of Wisconsin Hospital, but they had a vision of starting their own practice. They wanted to have a practice where they were in a partnership with their patients, which would allow their patients to be involved in their treatment planning from the start. At the same time this was happening back in 2007, I was a stay-at-home mom taking care of 3 kids, 2 dogs, and my husband. I had been doing this for over 14 years, and I was ready for a change. I just so happened to live across the street from the doctors. And one day we were having a conversation about the clinic, and the next thing I knew, I was working there. So I started, I was brought on a part-time basis to help out with HR functions, accounts payable, accounts receivable, things like that. And I was only working 20 hours a week. Within a couple months, I knew that I wanted to make this my career. I absolutely fell in love with the clinic, with the patients, with what we were doing and helping patients create families. And so I quickly moved into full-time and learned everything I could about everything that we do, and became the practice manager. So I am very proud to say that I have just celebrated back in December my 14th year with Wisconsin Fertility.
Great. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk, and Chris is going to talk a lot now about what this process is from the clinic side of things. So Steve, if you could advance the slide to the number 4. We are starting from the beginning. And these, as you probably recognize, are eggs, human eggs, forming into embryos. And this is the reproduction cycle. So Chris, can you talk about how this happens and what the beginning place is in your agency? How do people come to you and start this process?
Well, there's lots of different reasons that people come to us. In general, though, they already know that they're suffering from some kind of infertility challenge. It could be a male-female couple who have been trying to get pregnant on their own, and they haven't been able to. Maybe they've exhausted the little bit of opportunity with their own physician, and they have been sent to a specialist. It could be a male-male couple who quite simply just don't have everything that is required to have a baby. So they're going to need an egg donor. They're going to need a gestational carrier. It could be a female couple, and same problem. They don't have what it takes to create that baby, so they're going to need to use a sperm donor. There's lots and lots of different reasons. I can tell you that what we always say is it's an emotional roller coaster, because there are so many ups and downs. Think about the pregnancy tests, all of them that may have occurred before the patients come to us, and all of the ones that occur after they've come to us, and get excited, and there's hope, and then maybe disappointment as well. So we really do see it all.
Yeah. And I would say, in my experience as well, that even with lesbian couples, women are women and they have issues that affect their bodies. So we have a fair number of people who may have the ability to produce eggs, but they can't carry their own baby. So they don't have a uterus because they had cancer and they had hysterectomy at age 21. I mean, this is shocking reality for some young women, unfortunately, who have high hopes to be able to have babies, but then something happens, life happens, and they need reproductive technology.
Right. Along that same line too, just to jump on that, we do see quite a few younger patients who, are dealing with cancer, and maybe before they start chemo, they want to freeze their eggs or freeze their sperm so that in the future their fertility is protected as well.
Right. So we are all thinking about this process from the beginning. And Steve, if you can advance to the end. And this is what the hoped for, the longed for outcome is, of course, is for someone to be able to take the little baby that they've hoped for so long home with them. So as Chris was saying, there are lots of different versions of family and lots of different combinations of people that are trying to be able to have a child. And what we often try to remember is that this is really a process, not an event. Even though when people's hopes are high, they're really hoping to be able to get into the clinic and create their embryos, and then have someone be either carry their own baby or have someone carry it, and then boom, the baby comes home just a few months later. And of course, as we all know, it doesn't work like that. In non-assisted reproduction, it doesn't work like that. But in assisted reproduction, there are lots of other reasons why it's complicated. So Steve, can you move to the next slide? Good. So this is how it is a process, not an event. Steve, go forward again, if you would. So the next slide is the three parts of the puzzle here. And Chris, can you talk about this?
Yeah, so in order to create that baby and carry that baby, you need a uterus, which is obviously the top picture. You need an egg, the right picture, and then you need the sperm. So the egg and the sperm together are what are going to create the embryo. So there are three parts to it, and all three parts are needed. They're all very important.
They really are. Yeah. Steve, next slide. So here's where we're headed. We are hoping for a baby. And these are all the different kinds of families that come to the clinic. Chris, can you talk about the range of folks that you are working with and begin to talk about the process of what actually happens to produce that baby that is so longed for?
Well, as you mentioned before, it can be quite complicated, and it really depends on, what kind of couple we're working with. So, the easiest, as far as in, how things get so complicated, the easiest would probably be just a heterosexual couple, because you've got the man and you've got the woman. But then you could have a couple like that and they still need a sperm donor. Maybe there is a problem with his sperm. They still could need an egg donor. Maybe her eggs, are not viable. And they also still could use a surrogate or a gestational carrier. So that's really where it gets very complicated. We see, all sorts of different kinds of couples, and even a lot of single people too. They're going to come to us and, they're going to create a family on their own, or like I mentioned before, they're protecting their future fertility.
And you had mentioned before that before they even come to your doors, they have already had some traumas. Many people who are coming to any fertility clinic for care have already had something that has interrupted their ability to have their reproductive process go the way they had hoped.
Yes.
And that before they even step in there, that's already happening.
Yeah, I mean, for most of the couples, yeah, there's a lot, with the lesbian couples, they, a lot of times they don't have the fertility issues. They just need that sperm donor. So, but maybe they haven't gone down that route at all, and they haven't had any of the traumas associated with it. The other couples, though, in order for them to come to us, yeah, they're going to have tried before. Maybe they've done some testing. Maybe they've had some miscarriages, or it's just been, month after month of trying and not getting pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that we talk about at the clinic is, for every patient that walks in the door, pretend like they have a sign over their head that says, "Make me feel special," because they truly are special. And especially with the women, our focus is to really build them up and not make them feel and not allow them to feel bad, because a lot of what we see, the most natural thing in the world is to get pregnant, right? It's what a lot of us spend many years preventing until we're ready to start that family. These women have done that. They've prevented it for so long, and then all of a sudden when they're ready to start their family, for whatever reason, they can't. So sometimes they come in and their heads hung low and they're not feeling great about themselves. And part of our job, is the way that I see it, is to make them feel that they've done nothing wrong and that we're going to help them. We give them hope, and most especially, it's important to us to treat them well, because a lot of times they just don't feel good about themselves.
Right. And last week, Steve, you'll remember when Dr. Locke was talking, she talked about the dominant issues that women experience and bring with them into this fertility work: sadness and disappointment, inadequacy, guilt, shame, and grief. A whole combination of those things might be one of the factors that you as a clinic have to address with these people, because they bring that with them into what is going to be a difficult process anyway. And they're starting in a place where they're kind of down.
Absolutely. Yeah. There are many of us that spend time each week kind of in a counseling mode with patients. We're there to listen. One of the things that I do in my job is I do all of the financial counseling, which also means I collect the money. So sometimes I'm not super popular with the patients because they're writing me, pretty big size checks. But a lot of times what has happened is we'll start a conversation, there'll be some tears, we talk, I may share a little bit about my own personal things that that have happened with me. And it's a really nice bonding experience too. I've got a big, huge box of Kleenex that I keep in my office. But yeah, I think from the nursing assistants to the nurses to the women at the front desk, our insurance specialists, and of course, obviously the registered nurses and the physicians, but really all of us take a role in doing a little bit of counseling, and the fact of just listening and being there for them.
Yeah, it's really true. Steve, can you advance again? So here is one of the babies that we hope to help people deliver. And for those of you who are medical people, you're looking at that baby saying, oh my goodness, what's up with that baby? Of course, this is one of my grandkids. And I just love this picture because when he was born a month early, we called him a Shar-Pei baby because he was so wrinkled. He didn't have enough brown fat because he was too early. So he was a little bit compromised, but he did fine ultimately. But the point is that this is really a journey, and now we're going to talk about the intended parents and the potential gestational carriers that might be the solution that a family needs in order to be able to achieve their goal of being a parent. So, Steve, can you move on again? So in the world of surrogacy, what we do in most agencies in the US anyway, in some foreign countries, it's in some countries outside the US, there are other processes called traditional surrogacy, but we don't use that here. We use gestational surrogates, which are women who volunteer to carry a baby for someone else, knowing that that baby is not going to be her egg, none of her genetic material. She will only be the carrier. And that's for legal reasons that we prefer. In fact, we only do gestational carriage anymore in the United States as a whole. So the process is that usually people understand that they have friends or family members who have struggled with their fertility and they have been heartbroken. And so for someone who has successfully had children and they want to be able to give the gift of having a child to somebody else. They volunteer, they sign up basically to carry a baby for somebody else. And this image here is one woman's version of why she wanted to be a surrogate. And this is a sentiment that we hear constantly, that it's a really generous gift that they want to give to somebody else. So they go through a whole process. We have applications. We need to know that right now in the COVID pandemic, they have to be vaccinated, because there's plenty of documented medical research now that says that is the healthiest way for women to carry babies in the middle of the pandemic. They have to have had at least one successful pregnancy of their own. They don't have to be raising their child, but they have to have had a good pregnancy and a comfortable one, and they enjoy being pregnant. And so the women get clearance from their regular OB to say, sure, if you want to be a carrier, there's no reason for me to think that wouldn't be a healthy thing for you. We get their medical records. We find out what their insurance coverage is, and we interview them as an agency to understand where this desire is coming from. We ask both our intended parents and our carriers to have psychological evaluations, because we want to be sure that they're going to be in a healthy mental state in order to dedicate themselves to the partnership, which is what it is between the carrier and the intended parents. They both have to understand the nature of this agreement that they're getting into, which is both a business agreement of a kind of a weird sort and a very personal gift that the carrier is giving to the intended parents. So we need to make sure that they are in a healthy place in their life, that they have good support, and that they can carry this off in a good way, not only medically, but psychologically as well. So in this early stage, we're already beginning to try to make sure we understand who these people are, so we can take care of their mental health as they go through this process. Next slide, Steve. And the intended parents is a similar process. They submit an application, they participate in an interview with us as well. And I think this is true for all of the surrogacy agencies around. And we also ask them to list some characteristics if they have something in mind that they would like to have in the way of a relationship with the person who's going to carry for them. They also have a psychological evaluation. And we need to be sure that we understand that they understand that this relationship is going to be a partnership. Some people are a little bit dispassionate, perhaps I would say. They're a little detached. They're wanting to have a healthy woman deliver a healthy baby to them. Sometimes intended parents aren't necessarily interested in developing an ongoing relationship with the carrier. And so we have to know that from both parties, so that when we make a match, it's going to feel like a match. It's going to feel like it works for both parties. Okay, next slide, Steve. So as an agency, we gather information about all of these folks. Usually it's either a single or a couple as the gestational carrier is putting yourself forward. And most of the time, I would say 95% of the time, we have couples, gay or straight couples, that are looking to become parents together. Occasionally there's a single intended parent, and occasionally, actually more often, there are single women who are offering to carry babies for others as well. We do a background check, because as part of this process, the intended parents are going to compensate the carrier for the gift that they're giving. This is wear and tear on her body. And so while some people are concerned about surrogacy being a baby selling business, it really isn't, because the baby involved belongs to the intended parents. They are compensating the carrier for what she's going through in order to produce a healthy baby during a 9-month pregnancy, plus all of the work and the procedures and the injections and all of that she has to go through to get pregnant in the first place. So we have to make sure that the intended parents are sufficiently liquid in their assets that they can pay for this process, which is not inexpensive, as some of you probably know. So we do psychological evaluations and review all of that information, making referrals to attorneys as needed, and they are going to be needed in this process. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the psychological evaluation, because it is not meant to be finding out what someone's relationship is with their mother, you know, the classic psychological eval that tries to determine if you have Freudian analysis needs or not. We're trying to figure out if they can carry through in this relationship throughout the duration of the surrogacy process. And that's true for carriers as well as intended parents. So next slide, Steve. So the match is a crucial step in the process. And Chris, can you talk just a little bit about how you have seen this be a really important piece?
Well, it's so important that there's a good match, because you're sharing kind of intimate details with your surrogate. She's gonna be sharing intimate things with you. There's appointments that, with COVID, it's been a little bit more difficult, but we have opened it up a little more where the intended parents can actually come to the appointments with the gestational carrier. It just seems like everything works better when there's a good match, and the couple, the intended parent, has some kind of a relationship with the gestational carrier.
Yeah. So these are the ways that we try to match, and this is sort of the process that we go through in our agency. Other surrogacy agencies sometimes have more of a process that isn't one-on-one, where the intended parents are given perhaps 2 or 3 or 4 different profiles of potential matches, potential carriers that they could match with. We just choose not to do that, because we find that it works much more effectively for us to take a look at all the characteristics of what each one of those parties want in the way of a relationship, where they live, how much participation the intended parents want to have, all of those kinds of things. And then we make the match and the offer of the match to the intended parents and the carriers. And if they are intrigued by each other, then we go forward and they meet up. And usually 99% of the time, that is a successful match, and people are thrilled to be able to get started in this process. Next slide. The medical clearance and the legal protections are really important parts of this process. And after the match occurs, then all the medical information goes to the clinic, if they haven't already had a chance to see that information ahead of time for the gestational carrier. And then the carrier will go to the clinic. Even in COVID, this is true. The woman will go to the clinic and be evaluated to see if all of her working parts are sufficiently ready to carry a surrogacy pregnancy. And Chris, can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So one of the things that we would do is called a Sauna Histogram. And that's where we're looking at the carrier's uterus, looking for any reason that she wouldn't be able to safely carry a baby. So, clinics and agencies take all of this very seriously. And the last thing you want to do is transfer your precious embryos into somebody that, shouldn't be or couldn't be carrying a child. So we definitely do our due diligence to make sure that the carrier is healthy, she has good habits, and that she can carry a pregnancy.
And sometimes this evaluation results in information that the carrier has no idea is going on in her own body. Sometimes as women, we don't know that we have cysts or fibroids or something that are occurring within our uterus and our body. And because of the Sauna Histogram, they can take a look at stuff that women who are going to get pregnant as a personal choice and sort of the automatic, let's see if I'm going to get pregnant. They don't even know that they have scar tissue from their previous pregnancy that could interfere in another pregnancy. And when it comes to surrogacy, because there's so much invested in the success of these embryos, the reproductive endocrinologists want to be so sure that they are accounting for all the different variables that could possibly interfere if that can be known. So this exam is something that's usually not done traditionally. As far as I know, is people that are just getting pregnant on their own and taking their chances don't have this particular kind of exam. Is that right, Chris?
Right. Yeah, that's correct. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I can imagine that that's pretty anxiety inducing though, too, for intended parents, you know, especially when you're waiting for that long and going through all the hoops you've gone through.
That's why we want to be very careful to make sure that to the extent it's possible to anticipate all the possibilities of interruptions in a pregnancy. We want to see if we can do that. Producing for the carriers as well, because they're being checked out sort of, and that's anxiety producing. You want to think, I had my kids, all my pregnancies were fine. And now people are going to really check you out and see if your body is ready to carry this kind of pregnancy. And you have no reason to think it won't, but it's worrisome when you go through this process sometimes. Most people are fine. They come out of it perfectly okay, and then we proceed with the rest of the process. While this is happening, medically speaking, there are some very important legal protections that are being built by the attorneys that represent both the carrier and the intended parents. Each person has their own separate attorney. The intended parents pay for that. And it's an agreement that can be like a 30-page legal document. It's a really significant document that details all of the terms of what this arrangement, this partnership is going to be. And it's all about legal safety for the intended parents, for the carrier, and for the baby, of course, to make sure that there's nothing left out that would cause anybody to wonder whose baby this is, first of all, and to make sure that the carrier is compensated adequately and per the agreement, and that the intended parents also have some rights to how this process is going to go, so that it's a legally binding agreement that both parties commit to in a very specific way. And all of that has to happen before there's ever an embryo transfer. So after the medical clearance, but before the transfer actually occurs, transfer of the embryo into the carrier's uterus. Next slide, Steve. And so hopefully then, with all of that being behind us, then we get a pregnancy. And the fertility docs are so excited when their transfer is successful. Everybody's excited. The pregnancy is verified. And then the carrier is transferred. Her care is transferred back to her regular OB for care for the duration of the pregnancy. At that point, Chris's clinic is done, essentially, unless they're still storing some embryos that the intended parents are hoping to be able to use for a second or a third baby as well. So these days, most transfers are single embryo transfers. It used to be that there were double embryo transfers more often, but nowadays that is not the case, typically. And then throughout this process, throughout the whole pregnancy, the OB is going to provide all the regular OBGYN coverage for the pregnant woman. And then as an agency, the support agencies, surrogacy agencies such as mine, support the party through that process, including all of the emotional roller coaster that goes on for many women during the pregnancy and for the intended parents, some of whom have not been parents before. So we do a lot of work to support them and help them anticipate the kinds of issues that they're going to face when they bring their baby home as well. So next slide, Steve. So the birth is an interesting time for these pregnancies because there are two couples or at least three people usually that are going to be participating in this birth process. And it's our job at the Surrogacy Center to make sure that the hospitals and the nursing staff there and the docs there that are going to deliver this little precious one knows that there are two families that are involved in this process. And some small rural hospitals have never had a surrogacy birth and delivery, so they're pretty curious. And usually it's wonderful because we make sure that everybody knows what this is all about, who owns the baby, so to speak, whose baby this is. The intended parents get a room in the hospital, just like they would if they were delivering their own baby. And the GC is in her own room so she can recover. She gets her support person, whoever she chooses. And then the couples, both of the parties, arrange between them what they would like to have that birth process look like. To the extent that we can choose these things, babies sometimes interrupt our processes and they arrive when they are ready. And then all the best planning in the world goes out the window. But often people do know who's going to be in the room, if there's going to be skin to skin bonding, if the gestational carrier is going to offer to pump breast milk if she's close by. We never have surrogates. We do not encourage at all for surrogates to nurse the baby that they deliver. That is where some of our care to take care of their emotional health comes in, because that can be a very confusing bonding and attachment time for a person that is not going to care for that baby. So all of that is talked about and prepared in advance. So that even though in the beginning, Chris said, absolutely, these carriers are attached to the baby that they're carrying, but they know it's not their baby. They know they're not going to take that baby home or raise that baby. So all of that is talked about throughout this whole process to make sure that there aren't any unanticipated emotional pains that might occur if somehow that attachment ends up being something that we didn't intend, that nobody intends. And then finally, next slide, Steve. The legal proceedings are in process during the final trimester, the final month of the baby's gestation. And the lawyers are working behind the scenes to make sure that all the legal paperwork is filed properly. And you can see here how it works. In Wisconsin, at least, it's different in different states, but here in Wisconsin, you can have a pre-birth agreement, which is a bunch of paperwork and interviews that happen before the baby's born, so that when the baby arrives, everybody's just at the hospital doing their baby thing, and they don't have to be worrying too much about legal stuff. And then when the baby arrives, then the intended parents have their little baby, and the gestational carrier gets to meet and greet that baby according to the agreement that all these parties have made. And then the carrier goes home to her children who are waiting for her. Often the carriers and their partners, if they have one, and their children meet the new baby as well, because if the carrier has little children, those kids have been wondering about what's going on with mama and what's going to happen with that baby when it's born. So it's helpful for children to meet and greet these little ones, and then they go home with their intended parents. So that's pretty much our process here. And last slide, Steve. We are happy to answer any questions that we can as part of this webinar series. So if there are any questions, we'd be happy to answer any.
And feel free to even just unmute yourself and ask, or if you want to put it in the chat too, that would be more than willing to. Yeah, I'm going to ask a question since I know a little bit about it, but and maybe it's more for Chris in your experience, but like if it's a heterosexual couple of and they're using donor sperm or donor embryo, or direct, I mean, like, just, I mean, using that third party, like, what do you typically see from the male? You know, like, what are the questions that they typically ask or wonder about? Because I can think of trying to navigate the, you know, like the genetic piece of it, you know, like, especially if they don't have that genetic, you know, component.
Well, so a lot of the men tend to be more into the financial side of things. And I have seen so many couples where their questions are more the things that they can control and that they can do, you know, more task oriented. Their concern is always how best to support their wife, for sure, but they kind of do look at it as it's her, you know, kind of her thing, because she's the one, you know, doing, if she's going to, let's say they're using an egg donor, the wife is still going to have her own appointments and her own testing, and, you know, if she's going to be the one to receive the embryos. So the men, they're a little bit lost in the background. And, you know, even on our side of things, the women are always patient one. Anytime they have to sign something, and the men are always patient two. And we really don't mean any harm by that, but it's just we see the women a lot more than we do the men. So
And they do a lot more. I mean, they really do.
they really do.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, you know, conversely, you know, we do have quite a lot of men that want to be more of an active role. You know, nowadays you never hear, well, my wife is pregnant. What do you hear? We're pregnant, or we're trying to get pregnant. So I do see a shift, a change in that. On our perspective, you know, we love it when the men come in. It was very sad when COVID started, and that support person, whether it was the husband, the partner, you know, the next door neighbor, whoever they chose, couldn't be there for them. And that was really difficult. It was difficult on us, and it was difficult on the patients and their support person. So we were thrilled when we could open that back up, that they were able to be involved and come to the appointments again.
So we do have a couple of questions. So there's one that says, I've worked with kids as they open and meet their surrogate or donor. And then she asks, like, do you prep for that? And you ask when you think about, like, later on when their children, they meet, you know, their surrogate and stuff.
You mean
So,
for the baby that's born, do they get to meet their surrogate later on? Is that the question? Yeah.
Yes. I mean, yeah. I mean, I'm assuming that's, like, if you prep for that, like, if it's an open, you know, like if it's an open, almost like an embryo adoption, like, or an open donor.
I would say we talk with intended parents and gestational carriers about what kind of relationship they want to have with each other as time goes by. And some people form lifelong bonds with their surrogate, with their carrier. And other people, that isn't so much true after the first 6 months or a year. They exchange pictures, and they intend to, we assume that they tell their children that they were born with a surrogate because they have pictures of this woman who's pregnant and carrying their baby for them. But that's really up to the intended parents and the gestational carrier. That's worked out ahead of time, though. That's part of the conversation before the baby is even implanted in the carrier's uterus. That's part of the matching process that we use anyway.
Yeah, and I think the person Judy was saying that, you know, the kids arrange to meet, they search, and, like, basically, like, they're searching for the people, like, and obviously we know, like, with 23andMe and Ancestry, like, true anonymous is not really a thing anymore. But I think she was trying to get us, like, folks understand how curious kids may be regardless of the adult's plans. You know, like, even if they want to keep it secret, which we know, like, sometimes is not always the best thing, but like, having those conversations about, like what the children, like, what questions they may ask, you know, like, down the road and stuff, and how curious they may be about their surrogate or their donor.
Right. It's a conversation that hopefully all of these parents have with their children. sometimes the surrogates' children are also very curious about what's going to happen to this baby that they don't have regular contact with, but they're attached to it as well, at least in their heads, depending on their age when their mom is pregnant with somebody else's child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the next question is it correct that traditional surrogacy isn't used much anymore? So I was a surrogate 27 years ago and we used my egg.
Yes, that's really true. We, in our agency, we never do traditional surrogacy. It's legally much more complicated, and it really creates, it has the potential to create some very significant emotional distress on the part of all of the parties, including the child, because then if the carrier is using her egg egg, then that is her child. And so, Karen, I would be very curious how that was handled when you carried 27 years ago for someone. Nowadays, it's just not done because it's so complicated, and it can be a legal nightmare if a carrier changes her mind halfway through, after the pregnancy has begun, before the baby's delivered, or after. Then that's a whole minefield of legal issues that are waiting to occur. So we just avoid that by saying we don't do that kind of surrogacy. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's in most states too. And I know, like, I mean, not to get into the nitty gritty of it too, but I know that there's some states, I know like Michigan, for example, which is our neighbor to the north and east, compensated gestational carriers is illegal. So it's interesting, you know, how like this, there's various states that have the different laws and stuff about it. And yeah.
True for international surrogacy as well. Lots of countries, it's absolutely illegal, and it's complicated if you are discovered to be violating the law in your country. It can be really messy. So. Ugh.
The next question is, do the parents and carriers have ongoing counseling as well? I know they have the psychological assessment at the beginning, but do they have to continue for a while, or do many choose to?
Some people already are in therapy because of all the traumas that they may have experienced prior to even getting involved with surrogacy. And depending on what the needs are of each individual match or set of couples, sometimes there is ongoing counseling, but often there is not, at least not facilitated by us. We do keep in very close contact though. And if we have a sense that someone is really struggling with an element of this process, then we talk with the intended parents. If that's the carrier that's struggling, we talk with the intended parents about what they might be able to do to facilitate that woman getting some care if she needs it, because she wouldn't be having whatever struggles she's having if she weren't pregnant. So it's all related to the surrogacy. So we try, and afterwards, we recently had a woman who carried very wonderful pregnancy. And then at the very end, things got super complicated. She had a complicated delivery. Baby was fine, and she was ultimately fine, but she had preeclampsia, and that will preclude, likely for most clinics, her being able to be a surrogate again. So the intended parents paid for mental health services for her because she was devastated. That was not, she didn't sign up for that, obviously, nobody does. And she was really disappointed, as were the intended parents, because they had planned a second journey. So we do try to make sure that the carrier certainly is cared for in whatever mental health needs she needs before, during, and after that pregnancy.
Is there any other questions? If not, then I really thank all of you that have attended, you know, especially all three, but even just today, like, just really appreciate everybody taking the time out of their day to gather more information, knowledge, and awareness. And we do have one last post survey that I'll put in the chat as well. I really would appreciate if people could fill that out too. And any information that you feel like if you've attended all three and just like any suggestions that you would have that could do differently, like, or if there's topics or things that you would wish, like I know one of the things I think I've heard was like people wanted like that receipt to say like, yep, I like registered. So that was really informative. So this is the first, honestly, like thing that I've ever developed, like webinar series or anything. So any information like that would be great. And I just hope we continue to have conversations. I'm also going to put in the chat as well. Like I just say just broke some last week. I did a podcast episode with the University of Buffalo about infertility and loss and just a really, really great one. And I was able to do that with Sharon Covington. We wrote the textbook on fertility counseling and stuff. So, so regarding CEUs, you should be able to expect that in about a week or so. And then especially we will be able to send out let you know when on the YouTube page, like when those will be uploaded. So when they're uploaded, I will make sure that we send that out information. Just so like if you missed any of the other ones, like I said, highly recommend going back and viewing them. Definitely a great information and great speakers. And like I said, I really appreciate it. So like, and I'm going to put kind of my information there as well. And if you're interested, well, so let me just pull this up. Okay. All right, so there is that as well. All right. Well, like I said, I really appreciate everything. Jeanne, Chris, do you have anything else you want to say before we wrap things up?
No, good. Thank you all for coming.
Yes, we will be sharing the PowerPoint. So I will make sure within the next probably a couple of days or early next week that we'll be sending that out here shortly. So, and like I said, I really appreciate everybody. And I also want to honestly just give a shout out to Angela Willis for her support for all this. Honestly, like her and I started talking about this probably August, July last year, maybe. And I really just appreciate, like, honestly, like her support in school social work. It's
been my pleasure. You've done an incredible job, Stephen. Excellent, excellent work. And thank you so much, Jeannie and Chris, for your knowledge.
Absolutely. So, all right. Well, we can end. And like I said, I will, put my email there as well if you have any other questions or anything like that, or if you just want to keep up on what I'm doing. Also on LinkedIn, so everybody wants to do that too. So, yeah. But like I said, please, the main thing is just do this post survey. It'll help me with my paper so that I have to write about this. And yeah, I really appreciate everybody and have a good rest of your evening.
Thanks, Steve.
No problem. I really appreciate you coming.
I got here late, so I'll be looking for the YouTube link, but just so well done. Thank you so much.
Yeah. No